So then you have the next phase, which is your minimum viable product. And we talked about that. What's the smallest stripped down version you can have that's still called a game? After your minimum viable product, you have what's called a first playable. And your first playable is really the first time the game comes together and you can play it from start to finish, but not the entire thing. It's the first time you can get a really good feeling of the experience of this whole thing. So it's not the whole game. It's not even a giant part of the game. It's just this one little experience that says, okay, what's it going to feel like to play this game? And you stitch a lot of things together. So all the menus work, all the sound effects are working, the combat's working, all these different things. It's like it's all rough, but it's working. It's not until later on that, and you'll see later on, that you start to create like a demo. Demos are later. This is just your first playable that shows all the different facets, the UI, the HUD, all that stuff in their first pass. Did you have a question?
Yeah. So basically, there you're saying like your idea it's working for the first time.
Yeah, yeah. The whole idea as a whole, like all the stuff stitched together, and also like you can go from level 1 to level 2. So like in the POCs, the proof of concepts, it's just punching, and then in the next phase, in your prototyping phase, it's punching works with the whip and all this stuff. By the time you get down to first playable, you have main menu, and then you can load the game, you can launch the game, you can save the game, the HUD works, you can beat people up, you can use the whip, you can do all these different things. You can finish the level, then you can go into the next level, and you can actually get some game progression going in this thing. And then from there, full production begins. Basically, all of this times 10. That's when that starts. Like then it's just like you've got a valve and the water's on like a trickle, and then you just turn it on full blast. That's basically what happens there. Okay, and then you've got what's called a vertical slice. And I don't know if you guys have heard about vertical slice. You might have read it in postmortems and stuff like that. Vertical slice is something that comes later on that is, it's called a vertical slice because it's like when you drill down into the ground and then you pull up a big section, and the ground in that section will tell you what all the layers of the ground looks like. And it's a good sample of like what it looks like whether I'm standing here or over there or over there. There's going to be sand, then there's going to be clay, and then there's going to be gravel, and there's going to be all these things. So that's what your game is. Imagine your game is just a big patch of ground, and you drill a hole in it, and then you pull out a section, and you go, this is what it's going to be like. So your vertical slice is a slice down the whole middle of your game that shows you what gameplay is going to be, what the whole experience is going to be. And you're going to stitch a whole bunch of things together. And I say badly because you're only like halfway done with the game at this point, right? So you're going to say, okay, we have level 1, 7, and 12 and a half done. So let's make a game out of that. And so how do you make a game out of that? Like, well, you're going to have to stitch that together and try to find some cohesive way of making that feel like it's an actual experience. So then you'll probably have a little throwaway work in there, right? You're going to have areas because like level 3 doesn't normally connect to level 7. You got to figure out a way to make it seem like that's what you intended to do, to give it a nice feeling. So if they didn't know any better, if you said like there's going to be 40 more hours of this, you could be like, okay, now I know what it's like, because here's a beginning level, a middle level, and an end level to the game. Once you have your vertical slice, you take that vertical slice, and that's where you begin testing it. And testing is a broad term that's used for lots of different things. QA is testing. Those are the guys who get paid like $10 an hour to play your game over and over and over and over again. So if you've got your external landmarks, sorry, your testing begins and everything, and then you get your external landmarks. And all this stuff, the beauty of this is if you plan it, and this is why having that key dates document works so well, because this vertical slice can be given to the testers, the guys who break the game, the guys who try to make it so this is all the button clicks and make it UX as usability. And usability, the difference between this is they tried to break the game. These guys try to make the experience smoother. So if it takes you 15 button clicks to get into the saved game, that's too many. And they'll tell you like, hey, you need to slim this down and make it smoother because people are getting frustrated. Marketing is, you've probably all been somewhere where they're like, hey, you want to take a survey? And then and then you try. And then if you pass the survey, then they'll show you a product. And then they're like, hey, taste this. What do you think? And so that's what the games kind of are, where it's like you take a survey and then they bring people in that are in that demographic, kids, age 14 or whatever. And then they test those games and you see how the kids interact with it and everything else, right? So that's what QA, breaking the game, trying to make the game smoother, and then seeing what the public thinks of the game. So then you can the cool thing is you can take these vertical slice and then you apply some of the testing and the fixing and just making everything run smoother. And then you can take those things to E3 or GDC or Comic-Con. Those are your demos. Or you can put it out there for everybody to look at. So then you have some traditional dates, which is like your alpha, your beta, and your gold. And we all kind of know what these things are. Each company has a different definition of what an alpha, a beta, and a gold is. But traditionally, you want like all your bugs and major bugs, your minor bugs, your major bugs, and then gold is where you're getting ready to ship the game. TRC and CRC, that's really specific to first party. And first party is what is Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft are what's called first party. Basically, the people who make the hardware. So like if you still had like a Sega Genesis, right? That would be first party. They would be a first party because you have the guys who make and own the hardware. The guys who can tell you whether or not you can actually put stuff on that hardware, which is really interesting because you could make a game and then they could, in theory, say, we changed our mind, we don't want it anymore. And then there's nothing you can do about it. So you have to involve them early on. So that's what the TRCs and the CRCs are. Those are lists of like what you need to do in order to get your game onto their hardware. Not just technically, but like the rules. And everybody has rules about what you call things and how you go about stuff. And, like the Nintendo rule set will be completely different than the Xbox one. Like Xbox would allow you to have a little more violence than Nintendo will. So it'll be like a list, you can have blood in there or you can't have blood in there. Or when you refer to the controller, it's a controller or it's a joystick or like rumble or vibrate. Like you have to have all these names and they have to all be done properly. And then you do submission for a lot check. And submission is where you send the build off to the first party guys, to Sony, to Microsoft, and they look at it and they make sure that it doesn't crash and it's all good. And then they let you release it. And the interesting thing is that those guys, you give them the game and then they print up all the discs. You don't get to like print them up yourself. They print them all up for you. They control all that stuff. And then, yes, one sec. And then once they do that, then it goes out and the public gets to see it. And then your ideal shelf date. So from there, right? So now you have all that. You know what you're going to do. The next logical step for you is to create a timeline. And the timeline basically says, okay, I'm here today, and the game is going to ship on this day, and then I'm going to put all these lines. Basically, you're saying this, right? But you're adding dates to it. And you're just saying, like, this is when this is going to happen. And that really helps you figure out, like, wow, this is very close to this. So, I only have 2 months in between those. That's not a lot of time. You put all these, you put all these dates in there, and you say, like, what I'm going to do. And so this will help you figure out where everything is. And you can start to see how things are stacked up. And you're like, I have this and this spaced apart, right? Which is good. But sometimes you'll see that this is too close and you're like, this is scary. It's the first time that you can kind of see it in a way that like clicks in your head. So a timeline is really helpful. So once you have your timeline, right, the next step is to take your A, B, and C features, assign them to groups. You have your minimum viable product, your A's that I listed back there. Break those into A1, A2, and A3, and then you assign those to milestones in between here. So you say in the minimum viable product, we're going to break that into 3 sections, and then these are the times in which we're going to show these. And you usually want your milestones to be between 4 and 6 weeks apart, just in general, because I find that that's the way people like to work. Anything sooner, and they will be all really frustrated because they'll feel like they're having to like put on the dog and pony show every single week, and then they hate you for it. If it's anything longer than 6 weeks, then they start breaking stuff. So between 4 and 6 weeks is a good way to schedule milestones. That's these things here. So 6 weeks in between these ones. And what do you do to schedule? Well, basic scheduling, and this is probably something that you guys are learning already, is Scrum. And you'll hear the word Scrum in the word Agile. No Scrum, no Agile. All right, so it's a way of scheduling. Let's put it this way. There's many different ways of scheduling, and they're all super complicated, super boring, and they're you have to go to school specifically for them, and it's not something you want to do. But Scrum is a way that average people, can schedule stuff without having to go to school to learn this horribly long, boring thing, right? So Scrum puts the ability to schedule things in the hands of the people who are actually doing the work. So like if I was using one of those horrible ones, like let's say it's called Waterfall, is one of them, or Critical Path. If I'm using Waterfall, I'm the only guy who knows how to use it. So then I can tell you how long it takes you to do stuff because you don't know how to do it, right? So I can schedule it. If we're using Scrum and, you're doing the work, you're putting in the estimates, like you're actually using it. So Scrum is a way of scheduling and allowing the people who do the work to actually go in and help you schedule properly. 2 really good programs for that. When you first start out scheduling anything, your game, you want to use Trello. Trello is really easy to understand. It's like having a dry erase board, and you can move things around. Once you get really good at that, there's something called Hack and Plan, and Hack and Plan is for bigger teams. So you've got something here that is that's let's say for teams of like 5 people, and then you've got over here teams of like 15 or more people. Once you have all that, and the way you want to plan out your milestones is subdivide your tasks. Like I said, have buy-in from the people who are actually doing the tasks and working on it. Under promise, over deliver. And this is something you guys need to learn, and you should probably just learn in general. You can apply this in school, is just always, like if you're definitely going to have these things, but you think you might have these other things, don't mention the might have stuff. Because like if I say, tomorrow I'm going to give you $1, and then I come in tomorrow and I give you $2, you're going to be super happy. But if I come in and I say, I'm definitely going to have $1, or probably might even have a second dollar for you, all right? And then I come in tomorrow and I'm like, sorry, here's the $1, you're going to be like, boo. I wanted two. You said two. And I'm like, no, I said maybe. You'd be like, no, I wanted two. I already have, I was going to buy ice cream cone and everything. I have that money spent already. I'm really unhappy. So you never want, because that's just human nature. If you tell them like maybe, they're like, that's definite. So you always want to under promise, over deliver. Show up, say you're going to get $1, and I show up and I give you two. And then you're going to be like, woo, best day ever. So when you're planning out a demo, you have something called a critical path. And how do you want the player to play your game? What do you want to do how do you want them to progress through the level? Even if it's an open world still has missions. So you want to say, like, what are they going to be doing for this mission? And like I said, I'll put this out there for you guys to get, and you guys can look at this in more detail, but I don't want to bore you too much. I'll go through this as quickly as possible. And then there's something called your beat chart, and your beat chart allows you to figure out how, like, at what point in your project are you going to, it becomes difficult. And how do I keep this going, and how do I keep it entertaining? And I have to build tension. So if you ever play, I think it's Left 4 Dead. Left 4 Dead, you play it, and it's like insane combat, right? And then you enter a safe zone, and then insane combat, and then a safe zone, right? And that's because if you played it at that intensity level all the time without getting a break, you wouldn't be able to play it, for one. And two, you would just become desensitized to it. So you have to reset the player and then bring them back in, and then reset the player and bring them back in. And that's planned. That's what's called a beat chart, and planning those beats and where they hit.